Alright, so welcome to this real quick tutorial we're going to do here on creating a menu, like an object-specific menu for a game, kind of like a city builder or something like that. So what we're going to do is, step one, we're going to go ahead and create these sprites. So just create a generic sprite for a building, a person, and a button. You can see I've made mine all, for the most part, monochromatic. All the white parts. We're going to use draw sprite ext to draw these sprites in different colors to kind of differentiate them from each other. And so once you have those all created, and you can use these sprites if you want. They took me a whole about 30 seconds to create, but you can download them. I'll have them linked in the description and on the Reddit post there. And then we're also going to set up our room. We're just going to have one room because this is just going to be for an example or a test or demo, whatever you want to call it. And we're just going to have, whoops, that's not supposed to be a tiles layer. Let's delete that. And we're going to name this layer GUI. So we just want 3 layers. It doesn't really matter what size your room is or anything like that. I left mine the default size. And we're going to just have GUI instances and then a background layer. So GUI and instances are both instance layers. And then background is, of course, the default background layer there. And I set my background to kind of like this weird light green color. And that's all we really need for the setup. So we're going to go ahead and create some objects here. Our first object we're just going to call game, just like that. And this game object is going to be like our basically our game controller. I like to allow a dedicated object to kind of control a lot of the functions that go on behind the scenes of a game. This object is responsible for setting global variables and for doing game-related mechanics programming. So we're going to go ahead, and once we create that, we're going to add a create event to it. And we're going to type in randomize, of course, so that we can make sure our functions stay random. I'm going to do global.selected equals no one. And this is selected is going to be a global variable that will track which object in our game is selected by the user at any given point in time. So we're going to start out pointing to no one. And then we're going to enumerate an options box. And the whole point of this, or enumerate an options, I guess, constant. And these are going to be it's basically a library of all the available functions that are going to be available in our menu. So some of our objects we're going to be able to move, some we're going to be able to delete. We want to be able to change some of them, and there's also going to be one building that can tax the citizens. Now, to go along with that, we're going to use an option string, and this is going to be an array, and this is just going to correspond with our options, and it's going to have a strings so that the end user is able to know what the buttons are and what they do. So we just need a string version of all these numbers up here. So we're going to do move, delete, change, and we'll do tax him, just like that. And so there's our array for this. So anytime, so for example, if we have options dot move, that is equal to, if we do option string options move, that will be equal to move, just like that. So that way we can print out a string version of whatever the option is that our buttons represent, and it'll make more sense probably once we get going here. And let's see. Next thing we want to do is we want to create a hierarchy for all of our in-game objects, and we want to do something like this. So we want to have our main parent object up here, and then the different type of game objects we have. We're going to have some buildings. Look at that perfect font. Our perfect penmanship there. And we're also going to have some people. So we're going to have buildings and people in our game. And again, this is just an example, like a test, kind of just to show you how the functionality of this options menu system works. So it's not going to be a real in-depth game. But then kind of like a side spin-off kind of thing of people. We're going to have an alien. We're going to have a single alien. Or you can put a lot of aliens in your game if you want. But we're going to have a an alien type of object. And then under buildings here, we're going to have a house. And we're also going to have a city hall. And we'll just put CH for short. You can see this is kind of the hierarchy that we want to have. So there's going to be certain attributes that are that affect all in-game objects. These are going to be things like being able to select it and having a color defined for it, because again, all of our in-game objects are white and they're going to accept a color to change the color of them. So they'll have select and color, and then down here, all of our buildings will have the ability to basically, then buildings will have a certain list of options. We'll go through those in a minute, and then our people will have a certain list of options, and then alien will be just kind of like a different version of a person, and city hall and house will be children of buildings. So that way they'll have their own defining features, but for the most part it goes like this. Like a city hall is a building, which is a game object. An alien is a person, which is a game object. So that's basically the hierarchy that we want to shoot for here. So we're going to start out by defining our parents object. And so we're going to create another object, and we're going to call this game object parent. And then we're just going to add a create event, and we're going to define those two things that we were talking about. They're all going to have a color. So my color will equal C white. And that's just the default color for any object that we create now. It's going to be a default of white. And then we're going to set options to an empty array. And we'll define what's inside of that array based on the child object. And let's see. We also want every single in-game object to be able to display when it's selected. So we're going to add a draw event to this object parent. And we're going to say if global.selected is equal to ID. So that's basically saying if I'm selected, if this specific object is selected, then we're going to define a couple of variables here so that we can draw a black box around, or a black border around our object. Times 0.1 and of our y offset equals sprite height times 0.1. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to do draw sprite, if I could type, ext sprite index image index x minus x offset y minus y offset 1.2 1.2 0 C black and 1. So these, we're going to move the x offset and the x and the y coordinates off just a little bit, so that way the border goes around instead of just expanding to the bottom right. And then we're going to scale it up by 1.2. So we're just going to make it a little bit bigger, draw it behind the actual object itself, and it'll create kind of like a black border kind of effect to it. And then we're going to do draw sprite ext sprite index image index x y 1 1 0 my color my color 1, and then that just basically is a draw self with the my color option there. And finally, the last thing we want every in-game object to quality we want to share is when you click on it, it should select it. So we're going to come down here to mouse, and we're going to do left pressed. And right now, we haven't really incorporated any menus which are going to pop up when it's clicked. So we're going to put that into a to-do. Let's see, delete existing menus, because we only want one menu on the screen at a time. We don't want it to be you click on an object and it creates a new menu by it, and the old menu is still there. So we're going to delete any existing menus, and then we're going to set global.selected equals ID. So that's going to let everything know that the selected object is this object. And then we're also going to create a menu here. So we'll save that for now. We'll come back to this later and finish implementing that once we have a few more objects in here. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder And we're going to call this buildings. And inside of this folder, we're going to create an object, and we're going to name this O building. This is going to be a parent object for any buildings in the game. So we're going to set the sprite to S building. And I don't know what this is blinking about. But then let's see, we're going to set a parent. We're going to select the game object's parent. And then we're going to go in here and we're just going to do a quick create. We're going to do event inherited because we want it to perform the functions that its parent does. And then we're going to do options equals. And now we get to define which options we want this building to have. So we're going to say options dot move. And we also want to be able to delete it. So options dot delete. And those are the only two options we want for our building. So we're going to leave it as that. And that's really all we have to do for this parent object. We're going to get a little bit, we're going to define more specific things in the children of this object. So we're going to right click on the buildings folder again. We're going to create another building, and we're going to call this O house. And this is going to be our house object. So that will have a building sprite. Its parent will be the O building object. And then we're going to go in here and we're going to define its create event. So we're going to do event inherited again. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to do my color equals C blue. So that way, any house we build is going to be blue. It's pretty simple. And then we also want to have a city hall building. And so we're going to select same building sprite. Our parent will also be, whoops, not game object parent. Our parent will be O building. And because of the way that this is set up, so these two buildings that we have here have the O building as their parent, which has its parent as game object parent. So it goes up those tiers. So these house and city hall are both still children of game object parent. So any code that we have in here does affect our house and city hall also. All right, so let's get back down here. And in this create event, the city hall is going to be a little bit unique from the rest of the buildings. So what we do for that is first we put our event inherited here just to make it perform those other functions that are up higher in the hierarchy. And then we're going to say that every city hall is yellow. And the options that City Hall has. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to completely redefine the variable options. You could set up so that it just adds to the existing array, but that's a little bit weird because of how GameMaker does handles arrays. So just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to completely redefine the variable. But we'll do options. So these are the two options that all buildings have, but then this building is also going to have the option to tax the citizens. All we're going to do when we do hash out the functionality of these buttons, we're not going to do anything too in depth, but if you were actually making a city planner game, you could make selecting this button give you more money and lower the support from the citizens or something like that, you know. But you can have it do anything later. We haven't defined what these buttons do yet. Right now we're just setting basically a label to them. And let's see, I think right now, if we go ahead and go to our room, first thing we want to do, we're going to select the instances layer, and we're going to put our parent game object in there. And then we can just put a couple of houses in here. So we'll put some houses and a city hall in there. And then if we run the game, I should be able to show you. You can see here our houses are blue, and if you click on them, it draws a black border around them. Our city hall is yellow. If you click it, it also draws a black border around it. And so everything we've programmed so far is working. The options are being set in this, but we just don't have a way to draw the menu yet. But before we get to that menu object, we're just going to add another group, just kind of highlight how the hierarchy and inheritance works. So we're going to call this group people, and in there we're going to create O person. This will have the sprite of sprite person, and let's see, its parent will be game object. And in its create event, we're going to do event inherited, as you should be used to by now. And then we're going to do, since people are diverse, we're going to make every person a slightly different color. 255. And we're also going to say that the default options here for people will be to move, to delete, and to change their color. Okay. And the alien, we're going to create a new object, name that alien, and we're going to select its parent is, or sorry, its sprite is S person, its parent is O person, and we're going to go into its create code, and we're going to do, of course, event inherited. And the only difference this is going to have from a regular person is that it's always going to start out as green, but it's going to share all the same options as a regular person. So we can go in here and we can try to test this out as well. We can put a couple of regular people in there. We'll put an alien, put an alien in there too. And we'll start the game. And you can see our alien is green. Our people are slightly random colors. All right. Good so far. Next, we're going to go ahead and start with the menu system. So what we basically want to be able to do is whenever you click on one of these objects, we want it to be able to create a menu and copy these options that we've defined in each individual object. We want to copy these options over into that menu so that it creates a button that corresponds to each option that it's passed. So we're going to go right click on the objects. We're going to create an object and we're going to call this O menu. All right. Now it doesn't have a sprite because we're going to just draw a box that represents our menu. So in here, we're going to go into the create and we're going to say options equals empty array. And that's just basically declaring it so that we prevent any sort of undefined behavior, because what we're going to do is when we create the menu object, we're going to immediately afterwards copy over the options. So for right now, we're just going to say options are nothing because those will be defined by the calling object. And then we're going to do initialized equals false, and that will track whether or not the options have been copied over. And then we're going to set some display properties. So we want a border basically around the buttons of 4 pixels. We're going to set width is equal to 64 plus padding times 2. And the 64 is because that is the width of the sprite button that we made earlier. And the padding times 2 is because we want that 4 pixel border on both sides of it. And then height we will set right now to padding times 2 because we don't know how many buttons will be there, so we don't know the exact height of the menu yet. But we do know that we want at least that 4 pixel border on the top and bottom. And then we can go ahead and save that. Now, next thing we want to do is, now that we actually have this menu object, we can go back into the game object parent and the left pressed thing, and we can actually finish these to-dos. So what we want to do is we're going to first check if instance exists O menu. So we're going to say if there is a menu on the screen already, we're going to destroy that menu so that we can create a new one. Then we're going to select, set the ID to the current ID, and then we're going to create our new menu. And that is going to be done by setting var my menu is instance create layer, and we're going to create this at x plus sprite width. So it's going to create the menu just to the right of the sprite or the object that we're selecting. And then we're going to set it to the Y, so it's again creates it just to the right. We're going to create this on the GUI layer. And then we're going to create the menu. There we go. And next we're going to set my menu dot options equals options, and that's going to copy over the options that we have in whatever object we have. It's going to copy that over into our menu. So that's all set. Now we can go back down. We can finish the implementation of the menu object. So down here in the step event, we're going to say if not initialized. So if it hasn't been initialized yet, then we're going to initialize it. So we're going to set initialized is true. And then we're also going to say height plus equals 20 times array length 1D options. And the reason we do that is we already have the padding set for the top and bottom of this menu. Now we just want to add 20 pixels for each button that's going to be in the menu, and we chose 20 pixels because the sprite button that we created earlier is 18 pixels, and then we're just going to allow a 2 pixel margin basically at the bottom of each button. Now that we have that, we actually have to create the buttons. So we're going to say we're going to create a for loop here. I is less than array length 1D options plus I. And in this for loop, we're going to create the buttons, and we're going to create that the same way basically that we created this menu. Instance create layer x plus padding, y plus padding, and then we're going to create this y plus padding. Let me see. Plus 20 times I. Now that will make it so that it keeps making the next button lower and lower, so that the buttons go from top to bottom instead of being created exactly on top of each other, obviously. And then we're going to create that in the GUI layer. And finally, it's going to be a button that we're creating. We haven't created the button object yet, but that's what we'll do next. And then we're going to say myButton.option, because the button only has one option. It doesn't have an array of multiple options. And that's going to be, the buttons option is going to be, it's going to be whatever option is currently being cycled through. So the for loop is going to circle through, create a button for each option that we have in the options array. All right. And if we want to test this right now, which we could, if you just create an O button object, just like that, then it will allow you to at least test it out. It won't draw the buttons, but you will see a black box appear next to each one of the things, right? Next to each one of the objects that you select. Or no, we won't, not because we haven't done the draw event yet. So sorry. Go ahead and we're going to go to draw, and we're going to do draw set color C black. So we're just going to draw a black box. You can set this to any color that you want. And then we're going to draw a rectangle, and this is going to be x plus width, y plus height. All right, so that's just and then false, because this is going to be a solid box, not an outline. So then this is just going to draw a box basically to represent our menu. Okay, now I think that's all we need here. Last thing we want to do with this menu object is we're going to, whenever it's destroyed, we want the menu to be destroyed, but we also need the buttons to be destroyed with it. So we're just going to say instance destroy O button, and then global.selected equals no one, and that's going to set the selected thing, because we're destroying. Since we're destroying that menu, we want to change who's selected, just in case. We really want to avoid the possibility of it pointing to an object that doesn't exist anymore. So we're going to set that selected to no one. And now we can go ahead and try to execute this. And it should, when we select it, yeah, you can see that it's drawing our menu now. There's no buttons on that menu, but you can see there are more options here. The box is bigger for this person than it is for this house, and the City Hall's box is bigger also. So that's good. So that's obviously what we've written so far is working. The last thing that we need to do is create the button itself. And the button's behavior is pretty straightforward. If you've been following this far, should be pretty easy. So we're going to set the sprite to sButton. And we're also going to want, real quick here, to create a font. And I'm just going to call this F menu. And this is going to be a 10-point Arial font, just for simplicity. And again, you can tweak this so the display looks however you want, but this is just for example purposes. So in this button here, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a create event. We don't really need this because the option is going to be set soon anyway. But just for debugging purposes, and again, to avoid the undefined behavior, we're just going to set option equals -1. That's all we have to do in the create event. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to do draw, and we're going to set the behavior for when it's being drawn. So all we're going to do is draw self, and then we're going to do, we need to draw the text on top of it to tell the user what the button does. So we're going to do F menu, and then draw set color C black, because this is the color that we want the font. And then we're going to draw text. Let's see, X plus 3, Y plus 1. And the reason I picked X plus 3, Y plus 1 is because of the 3-pixel border that we have in our button sprite. So that way the text doesn't just start drawing right here. And there's a little bit of padding with the Arial font anyway, so that's why we use Y plus 1 instead of Y plus 2. And it should draw it just fine. But you can play around with those numbers to get it to display again how you want it to. And then we're going to do game.optionString option. So then basically what this little segment here is doing is it's checking the game object for that option string that we created earlier. And it's asking what is the string for my option. Because when this button's created, it's going to be assigned an option. So just as a quick example here, let's say we have a house, or yeah, a house, okay? And its options are to move and delete. All right, so it sends these options when it creates the menu. It says, now menu has the options of move and delete. Then it creates the buttons, and one button is move, and one button is delete. And so we can just ask what is the option, what is the string for this option, and when we pass it, the option, which is just an integer variable, it's going to return the string. So basically, when we pass it the O button for the one that is options.move, it's going to return move as a string, and the delete is going to return delete as a string, and the tax is going to return taxum as a string, because that's what we set up earlier in the game object. Move corresponds with move, delete with delete, change with change, tax with taxum. Okay. And so let's go back down to our button here, and we'll get rid of this spiel down here because that is just for illustrative purposes. You should only have 4 lines of code right now in your draw event to draw the button itself, to set the settings for the text, and then to draw the actual text. That should be all that's in the draw event right now. The very last thing we have to do, because you'll see now, if we press F5, when we draw it, it should... It should create the button here. Oh, you know what? Maybe what I want to do. Yep, there we go. Okay, so it's just drawing the menu over top. So basically what we want to do is we're going to change, we're going to go up here into the left pressed event for the game object parent. We're going to change the layer to instances. So we're going to draw the menu itself, the menu background, on the instances layer. And everything else stays the same. So once you have that, then when you compile it and run it, it should show up just like this. Move and delete. What you'll see when you click them, it doesn't actually do anything. Hovering over them doesn't do anything. So just kind of like a nice finishing touch that we can do in this draw event to make it look a little bit more responsive is we can just change, instead of drawing self outright, what we want to do is we're going to go if, this is going to be a multi-line if statement, so we're going to space it out like this. We're going to say median of x x plus sprite width and mouse x is equal to mouse x, and the median of y plus sprite height and mouse y is equal to mouse y. So what this is saying is if the mouse is over top of this object, or over top of this button, then we're going to draw sprite extended, sprite index, image index, x, y, 1, 1. And you can change the scale too, so the button kind of gets bigger when you hover over it. But right now what we're just going to do is going to just change the color of it to yellow when you hover over it. And if it's not hovering over it, then we're just going to do draw self like normal. And we'll see the effect of this here is that when you click that and hover over it, you can see now it highlights whatever you're mousing over. Now, the very last thing we need to do is actually make the buttons do something. So we're going to come down here in the button object, and we're going to do left pressed. And we're going to do a switch statement for whatever option this button represents. And we're going to do options.move. And let's see. Yeah, so under the options move, we're going to do global.selected because we want this code to affect whatever object is currently selected. X equals irandom room width minus 64. And global.selected.y equals irandom room height minus 64. And I mean, these are just arbitrary values. Again, this is not meant to be like a full scale game. This is just to demonstrate how this menu system works. And then we're going to destroy this menu. The reason we want to destroy the menu is because we don't have code in place to move the menu along with the object. So the object's going to move, and the menu would stay where the object used to be. If you want, you can add in code to move the menu. You can make it so that the menu always shows up in the same spot. But for this particular situation, we're just going to destroy the menu after the object moves. And then we're going to do the other option would be delete. And that all we're going to do is instance destroy global selected. So it's just going to destroy the object that's currently selected. And since that object has been destroyed, we also need to destroy the menu. Now another option that we had was options.change. And whenever we change, it's just going to change the color. And again, this option would only be available to the people because O_person and O_alien are the only two that have the options.change in their options variable. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to do global.selected.mycolor equals make color RGB. irandom 255, irandom 255, irandom 255. All right. And that's all we need to do for that to change the color. And finally, we're going to do the tax, which is only the city hall would be able to do this. And all this is going to do for these purposes is create a quick little message. And that's it. All right, and that's all we need to do. We should have a fully functional working example of how this menu system works. So we can see here we have our alien who always shows up green, but he's going to try to blend in, so we'll hit change there. And now he's a light blue. Don't like that. We'll just keep hitting change till we find something we like. Pink. That's beautiful. Then we're going to select this house. We can move the house. You can see it keeps moving around. And we can select this house here and move it. We can select this person here and delete him. We don't want regular people because it's only the alien that we like. We'll move the alien also. We can also tax them. We get our message here. We're going to delete the city hall because we don't like taxes. We're going to delete these houses. And finally, change the person to blue and then delete them. Perfect. There we go. Now you can see how this menu system works. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Make sure to ask me any questions. Anything you think needs elaborated on, please let me know. If you think I did anything wrong, I would love to hear it so I can make this better. This isn't supposed to be a flawless, ready to ship kind of product. It is just to show you how the menu system works, and so that you can incorporate it into your own game.